Joining me is Clare Armstrong, National Political Editor of the Herald Sun and the Daily Telegraph. Clare, thank you so much for your time. Now, I hear some on the Liberal left say this disaster proves Dutton went too far for the right. And this is what comes to listening to Sky News. But what I am seeing is that this had nothing to do with ideology and almost everything to do with another I, incompetence. Take us through the worst examples that you have today uncovered.
Yeah, look, I spent quite a bit of the last 5 weeks on the road, almost half of it on Peter Dutton's campaign, and sort of started to detect even then that things weren't as well-oiled of a machine as you would expect when a party's had 3 years to prepare for an election. And what's sort of come to light in the last few days is it wasn't just at the very end that messaging was a problem, but at the very beginning, the development of policies was really late and rushed. For example, it was only decided a few hours before Peter Dutton actually announced his plan for a gas reserve on the East Coast. In the budget reply just before the election was called, only decided that he would put that in the speech quite late, so much so that it left his senior minister or shadow ministers scrambling to tell the gas companies that it was coming. They were hanging up on Susan McDonald, who was the resources spokeswoman. They were so furious at sort of being let in on this so late. It was changing as they were announcing it effectively. And not only that, but the modelling that Peter Dutton then got hammered on for about 12 days to produce during the election. Well, the final version of it, some in HQ in the Liberals weren't able to access or understand what was going on with it because the people behind that modelling, Frontier Economics, one of them was overseas and turned out to be uncontactable for several days. So at every turn, just in that policy alone, you can see there's this cascading kind of issue of organisation, policy development, and clearly not a very well staged out plan for why you would be announcing that policy at that time and then how you plan to sell it to the public. And like that is literally just one example.
Oh, Clare, I mean, I'm laughing, but I shouldn't because it's just a scandal. I mean, so many people devoted so much of their lives to a Liberal win, and this is what happens. I mean, really. Now, Clare, people are blaming Angus Taylor, saying that, why should he now be leader when his party to this stuff up? I mean, like that decision to not match or better beat Labor's miserly tax cuts and instead offer, that cut in petrol excise for 1 year. That seems to have been an impulse decision. What was his role in this whole disaster?
Well, what we're sort of learning now is that definitely it was his decision to immediately not want to support Labor's tax cuts. Sort of they launched this argument, the Liberals, that it was too little, too late. But then the delay in actually coming up with their own version, this temporary tax offset, essentially allowed Labor to cast the Liberals as being in favour of higher taxes. So in terms of that timing between saying you weren't going to support Labor and then coming up with your own plan, definitely Angus Taylor had a seat at that table. What's a bit more complicated that we've learning now, and I've had some sources tell me that essentially Angus Taylor was in favour of doing something more ambitious, more along the lines of indexing tax rates for income earners. But essentially it was actually Mr Dutton and the people around him that got cold feet there, and ultimately that idea was scrapped within sort of 48 hours of the Liberal launch, and the idea of a temporary offset came into the play. But, that's just another example where there clearly wasn't the staging and the thinking through of policy development. You kind of have to wonder what was going on for 3 years.
Clare, as you say, they had 3 years. And it's not a surprise this election was held now. There was only one more week it could have been held before that was it. I mean, to act like it came out of the blue, it's stunning. Good heavens, policy. But from what you just said there, who's supposed to blame? Is it Dutton himself? Was he a control freak that just simply got it wrong?
I don't think it's right to cast Dutton as a control freak exactly. It's pretty clear that he ran a very tight ship. He had a very loyal, small team around him that he implicitly trusted. And my kind of broader view is that maybe that narrow focused and that narrow inner circle, you know, if the groupthink is off, then and you've got no other external kind of voices that you're listening to telling you that this is a problem, then it's a bit of a collective failure there. But ultimately, with Peter Dutton being the leader, and I mean, you have to say on Saturday night he did own the disastrous result. But I think what I've seen over the last 3 years is I've often heard shadow cabinet ministers say that, well, they feel like they get a fair hearing with Dutton, even if he then goes his own way. But my sort of thought there is, well, if he's continually going against you and going his own way, who is he listening to? It sounds like it's, you know, his chief of staff, his comms director, some of those people in his inner circle in the party and in the parliament, and that maybe all of their read on what the situation was off. I mean, overall, I would say this was an election that they felt they could win by letting Labor lose, and unfortunately they didn't factor in that Labor is quite a good campaigning machine, and they essentially just ran them down.
Oh, look, what a ridiculous strategy, though, just relying on someone else to flop instead of grabbing it. Clare, look, what you just described in your office is so different to how Bob Hawke ran and did it really well. He had professional grumps in his office, you know, Peter Barron and Jeff Walsh and people like that who were just, they didn't put up with any bull, and if they didn't like an idea, they'd say so. And he had a healthy enough ego to be able to cope with it, and it just worked brilliantly. Clare Armstrong, great story in the papers today. Thank you so much for your time.